two brothers, one bound by justice, the other by a curse.
When the devil offered power, one said yes.
And their blood became the price.
This is the devil's bargain between two brothers.
Red Hollow. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. On most nights, you could hear the whistling of coyotes or the lazy rattle of a snake sliding across the sand. But on this evening, the land was dead quiet. The silence pressed on the skin like the weight of a storm not yet born. Red Hollow lay at the center of that silence. Once, it had been a thriving frontier town where miners struck veins of silver, gamblers filled the saloons, and cowhands drank till morning. Now, it was nothing more than a shell. The mines had dried up. The saloon doors creaked on their hinges. The church bell tower leaned like a broken spine. And most of the buildings stood abandoned, eaten away by the desert wind. But the town was not empty. A few stubborn souls remained, merchants too poor to leave, widows who clung to memories, and a handful of ranchers who swore their roots were too deep to pull out. They lived with the unease of people who had seen too much. Their eyes darted to the horizon more often than they should, and their voices dropped whenever a certain name was spoken. That name was Elias Crow. It had been 10 years since the outlaw rode out of Red Hollow in a storm of dust and blood, leaving a trail of bodies and whispers behind him. Stories about him grew taller with every retelling, that he'd never lost a duel, that bullets turned aside when they came for his heart, that the devil himself had marked him as his own. And yet, none of those stories were told aloud, not in Red Hollow. Folks feared that speaking Elias's name too freely might call him back. The marshal, however, had no such luxury. Cole Avery stood at the window of his office, the lamplight casting long shadows across the room. His badge glinted faintly on his chest, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who had long since grown tired of justice. His hair, once black, was streaked with gray. His face bore the lines of years under the desert sun, and his right hand trembled slightly when it rested on the grip of his Colt. In his mind, he could still see Elias's face, the grin sharp as a blade, the eyes that once carried laughter now burning with something darker. They had been brothers once, not by blood, but by bond. They had ridden together, fought together, and dreamed of carving their names into the land. But all that had turned to ash on the night Elias chose the path of shadows. Cole poured himself a drink, the glass clinking against the bottle. Whiskey burned down his throat, but it did nothing to ease the heaviness in his chest. A knock came at the door. "Marshal?" a voice called, timid and shaking. "Come in," Cole answered. The door creaked open, and young Tommy Hicks stepped inside. Barely 18, the boy worked odd jobs around town, running messages, sweeping stables, carrying water. His face was pale, his hat twisting nervously in his hands. "They say," Tommy swallowed hard, "they say Elias Crow's ridin' this way." Cole's jaw tightened. "Where'd you hear it?" "From the traders, Marshal, down by the creek. They seen him, black coat, black horse, and riders following him. Said he asked for Red Hollow by name." The whiskey in Cole's stomach turned sour. He had known this day would come. For years, he felt it creeping closer, like the slow crawl of the desert Sunday. Now, it was here. "Tell the folks to lock their doors," Cole said quietly, "and stay out of sight come sundown." Tommy hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other. "Marshal, is it true, what they say about him? That he can't be killed?" Cole's eyes drifted to the revolver hanging at his side. He thought of the night he and Elias had stumbled upon that cursed mine shaft years ago, of the whispers that clawed at his mind, of the way Elias had stayed when Cole had run. He thought of the way Elias walked out of the darkness with eyes no longer his own. He set the glass down, his voice steady but low. "Son, everything that lives can die. The trick is findin' the way." Tommy nodded slowly, though fear still clung to his face. He turned to leave, but before he slipped out, he whispered, "God be with you, Marshall." The door closed. Silence settled once more. Cole leaned against the desk, running a hand across his weathered face. He thought of his wife, buried on the hill beyond the churchyard. He thought of the promise he had made at her grave, that he would see Elias brought to justice, no matter the cost. The desert wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. It sounded almost like laughter. Cole straightened, his hand brushing against the badge pinned to his chest. For years, it had been a symbol of duty, of law, of protection. Tonight, it would be a target. He holstered his gun, blew out the lamp, and stepped into the night. The moon hung low and red over Red Hollow, casting the town in a blood-tinged glow. The air smelled of dust and old sins. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of hoofbeats stirred the ground. Elias Crow was coming home. Chapter 2. The Brothers Past. Long before Red Hollow was a ghost town, before the name Elias Crow carried fear, there were two boys who rode the same trails and dreamed the same dreams. Cole Avery and Elias Crow weren't kin by blood, but in those days, you wouldn't know the difference. They grew up together on the dry edges of the frontier, where survival demanded loyalty, and loyalty often meant more than family. Cole was steady, the kind of boy who kept his word even when it hurt him. Elias was fire, sharp-tongued, reckless, and always chasing something bigger than what his hands could hold. If Cole was the anchor, Elias was the storm. And like all storms, he was bound to change the land he touched. They spent their youth breaking wild horses, mending fences, and fighting off boredom with card games in the bunkhouse. Nights stretched long beneath the stars, the desert wind carrying their laughter across the open plains. But what bound them most was the dream they shared. "We'll ride out one day," Elias used to say, his eyes shining with restless hunger. "Find a place of our own, not just scraping by for some ranch boss, but living like kings." Cole would smile faintly, his gaze steady on the horizon. "Kings don't last long out here." "Then we'll make sure we do," Elias replied, grinning. It was a dream built on dust and whiskey, but for boys who owned little else, it was enough. One summer night, when the air was thick and the cicadas screamed, that dream began to twist. The cattle drive had ended early, leaving the two of them restless. Elias insisted on exploring the hills beyond the ranchland. The older hands warned was no good. Cole, against his better judgment, followed. They rode until the moon was high, their horses' hooves crunching against the dry earth. Then they saw it, a yawning crack in the ground, half hidden by rocks and scrub, as though the desert itself had split open. "Looks like a mine shaft," Elias said, eyes gleaming. "Maybe left behind by the old prospectors." Cole frowned. "Or maybe left alone for a reason." But Elias was already off his horse, lantern in hand. His curiosity was stronger than caution. Cole cursed under his breath and followed. The shaft descended into darkness, the air cool and heavy. Strange markings were carved into the walls, spirals, claws, symbols that made Cole's stomach knot. Deeper still, they found a cavern, its floor glistening with black stone that pulsed faintly as though alive. At its center lay an altar. It wasn't made by miners. The surface was smooth, almost glass-like, and streaked with crimson stains that hadn't faded with time. Bones, animal or human, Cole couldn't tell, were scattered around it. "What in God's name?" Cole whispered. But Elias didn't answer. He was staring, transfixed, his lantern casting long shadows across his face. His lips parted, and though Cole heard no sound, he knew Elias was listening to something. Then the whispers reached him too. They weren't carried on air. They weren't sound at all. They slid straight into his mind, cold and insistent. Promises of gold, power, fearless strength, a a kingdom carved from the desert. Cole staggered back, clutching his head. "Do you hear that?" Elias nodded slowly, his eyes darkening. "I do." "We should leave," Cole said, his voice sharp. "Now." But Elias stepped closer to the altar, his hand reaching out. "Elias, don't." Cole grabbed his arm, yanking him back. "Whatever this is, it ain't for us. You feel it. You know it's wrong." For a moment, Elias hesitated, his jaw clenched, torn between temptation and loyalty. Then his grin returned wide, defiant. "Wrong or not, Cole? This is the chance we've been waiting for." Cole shoved him, harder this time. "I won't let you." Elias's face hardened, shadows cutting across his features. "Then maybe you ain't the brother I thought you were." The words stung deeper than any blade. Cole turned and fled, stumbling through the shaft, desperate to escape the whispers clawing at his skull. Behind him, Elias's footsteps slowed. Then they stopped altogether. Cole burst into the night air, gasping. The moon hung high, pale and indifferent. He waited, chest heaving, but Elias did not follow. When he finally returned to camp at dawn, Elias was there sitting by the fire as though nothing had happened. His grin was easy, his voice smooth, but something in his eyes had changed. Something dark lingered there, something Cole would never forget. The years that followed drove them further apart. Elias grew bolder, quicker with his gun, hungrier for more than the land could give. He took to gambling, to robbing, to carving his name into the frontier with blood and lead. Cole tried to hold him back, tried to remind him of the bond they once shared, but every attempt ended the same. Elias laughing, Cole frowning, and the distance between them widening. The final break came the night Elias rode into Red Hollow, with a band of outlaws at his back. They shot their way through the town, burned the bank, and left 3 men dead in the street. Cole, by then wearing the marshal's star, stood in their path. Elias looked at him that night with the same grin he'd worn at the altar. "Still trying to play hero, brother?" Cole raised his Colt. "You've gone too far." Elias tipped his hat, his eyes glinting red in the lamplight. "Far enough to never come back." And with that, he rode into the darkness, leaving Cole with a town in ashes and a promise that their paths would cross again. Now, years later, with Red Hollow worn down and the whispers of Elias's return growing louder, Cole knew the past hadn't died in that mineshaft. It had only been waiting for sundown. Chapter 3. A Town on Edge. The news of Elias Crow's return spread through Red Hollow like fire on dry brush. By morning, every door was shut, every window latched. The little schoolhouse was silent, its benches empty. The blacksmith quenched his forge and stacked iron bars across his door. Even the saloon, once the heart of the town, sat dark, its swinging doors chained like a coffin lid. Fear had a way of changing the air. It made every shadow seem deeper, every sound sharper. The few who dared speak of Elias did so in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the horizon as if expecting him to materialize from the dust. Marshal Cole Avery felt the weight of that fear more than anyone. He walked the main street that morning, boots crunching against the gravel, his badge catching the Sunday. Behind every shuttered window, he felt eyes watching him, not with hope, not even with trust, only with desperate expectation. They wanted him to stop Elias. They needed him to. But Cole knew better than most. Some battles couldn't be won with bullets. At the church, Reverend Matthews knelt in prayer, his thin frame bent low at the altar. The marshal lingered at the doorway, listening to the whispered plea. "Deliver us from evil. Keep the shadow from our door. Protect us from the devil's hand." Cole's throat tightened. He wanted to believe those words could keep the darkness away, but he had looked into Elias's eyes once before, and what stared back was beyond scripture. The Reverend lifted his head, startled to see Cole. His eyes, pale and weary, searched the marshal's face. "Will you stand against him?" Matthews asked. Cole hesitated. He thought of his trembling hands, of the nights he woke, sweating from dreams of the mine, of Elias's voice echoing through his skull. "I'll stand," Cole said at last. His voice was low, steady. Question is, Reverend, will it matter? The old man's lips trembled, but he placed a hand on Cole's arm. Sometimes stand-in is the only thing that matters. That afternoon, Cole sat in his office, staring at his Colt laid out on the desk. He had cleaned it twice already, the metal gleaming, the chamber clicking smooth. Still, he felt no comfort. A gun was a tool against men, but Elias had not been a man in a long time. His eyes drifted to the drawer he had kept locked for years. Slowly, he opened it. Inside lay a small leather-bound book, its pages brittle, its cover scarred with strange symbols. He had taken it from the mine that night, ripped it from the altar, before fleeing into the dark. He had never opened it since. Now, as the shadows grew longer, he flipped it open. The writing inside was jagged, ink that bled like dried blood. The words twisted across the page, a language not meant for mortal tongues. But one phrase stood out, scrawled in English as if mocking him. Blood binds. Fire breaks. Cole slammed the book shut, his jaw tight. He did not know if the words were prophecy or curse, but they echoed through his mind, heavy as the desert sky. By sundown, a handful of townsfolk gathered at the edge of the square. Not to fight, they weren't fools, but to watch. Curiosity was stronger than fear, and legends had a way of dragging people close. Old Man Duffy, the blacksmith, leaned on his cane, muttering that he'd seen Elias walk away from 6 bullets before. Mrs. Harper clutched her child close, whispering prayers under her breath. Young Tommy Hicks stood near the hitching post, his face pale but his eyes bright with the reckless awe of youth. Cole stepped onto the street. He felt their stares press against his back like weight. The dying sun painted the world in red and gold, as though the desert itself bled for what was coming. For a moment, silence held the town. Then, faint but steady, came the sound of hoofbeats. The crowd stirred, whispers breaking like waves. Dust rose on the horizon, thick as a storm cloud. Elias Crow was coming. He rode at the center of a small band of riders, each one cloaked in black, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. But it was Elias who drew every eye. His coat was long and dark, snapping in the wind. His horse was a stallion, black as midnight, its eyes glinting with unnatural light. And Elias himself, his face had hardly aged, though a decade had passed. His grin was the same, sharp and mocking, but his eyes burned faintly red, as if embers lived behind them. He reined in at the far end of the street, his riders halting behind him. The town held its breath. "Well," Elias drawled, his voice carrying like smoke, "ain't this a sight? Little Red Hollow? Still standin'?" "Barely." Cole stepped forward, his hand resting near his holster. His voice rang clear. "You ain't welcome here, Elias." Elias chuckled. "Funny thing, brother, I don't recall asking for a welcome. I came for what's mine." "What's yours?" Cole spat. "You left this town in blood and ash. There ain't nothing here for you." Elias tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Oh, there's something buried in this dirt that you and I both remember. Don't play dumb, Cole. You know what I'm talking about." Cole's gut clenched. The altar, the whispers, the book, the crowd murmured, confused but restless. They saw only 2 men facing each other at sundown. They couldn't feel the darkness that stretched between them. Elias leaned forward in the saddle, his grin widening. "Tell me, brother, did you ever open that book you stole? Did you read what it said?" Cole's hand twitched near his Colt. The whispers from the mine seemed to stir in his head again, cold and insistent. "Tonight," Elias said softly, almost tenderly, "we settle it. You and me, just like we were always meant to." The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the street. The crowd scattered to the edges, hearts pounding, eyes wide. 2 brothers, one cursed bond, a reckoning at sundown. Cole's voice was low, steady as stone. "Then let's finish it." And with that, the town of Red Hollow braced for a storm it would never forget. Chapter 4. Sundown. The desert sun bled into the horizon, sinking like a dying ember. Shadows stretched long across Red Hollow's single dusty street, swallowing the wooden fronts of shuttered buildings. The town held its breath. At one end stood Marshal Cole Avery, boots planted firm, his hand brushing the grip of his Colt. His jaw was set, but his heart beat heavy in his chest. At the other end sat Elias Crow, astride his black stallion, his coat whipping in the desert wind like the wings of a crow. His grin was a scar across his face, eyes glowing faintly red in the twilight. Between them, the street was empty, but it was not silent. The whispers returned, faint and cold, crawling into Cole's skull, the same voices from the mine years ago. They hissed promises, warnings, laughter that was not human. The townsfolk pressed against walls and alleys, watching with wide eyes. Children hid behind skirts. Men gripped rifles they knew they'd never dare fire. None would interfere. This wasn't just a duel. It was a reckoning between brothers. Elias swung off his horse, boots crunching against gravel. He stood tall, dust swirling around him. "Well, brother," he called, his voice smooth as smoke. 10 years I've been waiting for this sunset. 10 years and you're still wearing that badge." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Someone had to clean up your mess." Elias chuckled, pacing slowly, his shadow stretching unnaturally long. "My mess? No, Cole. My gift. I offered you the same chance that night. Power, freedom, and you ran like a coward." Cole's hand hovered near his holster. "I ran because I knew what it cost." "It's agreed. And yet here you are," Elias said softly, his grin widening. "You think that badge, that tin star, means you're free? No, brother. You're still chained to me. Always were." The words cut deep. Cole remembered the altar, the whispers, the leather-bound book. The curse Elias had taken had bound them both, blood to blood, soul to soul. The knowledge weighed heavier than his gun. "You've already lost," Cole said, though his voice trembled. Elias tilted his head, amused. "Then prove it. Draw." The street fell into silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cole's fingers twitched. The world slowed. His vision tunneled, locking on Elias's chest. For a heartbeat, all sound vanished. Then, bang! The shot cracked through the air like thunder. Cole staggered back, smoke rising from his Colt. His bullet had flown true, straight into Elias's heart. The outlaw's body jerked, his coat smoking, the hole dark and deep. Gasps broke from the crowd. For a moment, it seemed done, but then Elias laughed, a low, rattling sound that grew into something wild. He straightened, brushing the dust from his coat, and looked down at the wound. His flesh glowed faintly around the hole, red embers pulsing like coals in a fire pit. "Still don't get it, do you?" Elias whispered, his voice carrying like a curse. "I can't die. Not unless you do." Cole's breath caught. His hand trembled, gun still smoking. Elias stepped closer, his boots echoing in the silence. "We're bound, Cole. That night, when I touched the altar, the devil didn't just take my soul. He took ours. That's why you hear the whispers, too. That's why your bullets don't matter." Cole's chest tightened, rage and despair twisting inside him. "Then I'll find another way." Elias grinned. "There is no other way." Suddenly, Elias drew. His gun was a blur, faster than sight. The shot rang out. Cole felt the heat graze his cheek, the bullet whistling past. It slammed into the wood behind him, close enough to singe his hair. Elias lowered his revolver, smirking. "If I wanted you dead, brother, I'd have done it. But I don't. I want you to see. I want you to understand that you're already mine." The townsfolk whispered, terrified. Mrs. Harper crossed herself. Tommy Hicks clung to the hitching post, eyes wide. Cole steadied his breath, forcing steel into his voice. "You made your bargain, Elias, but I'll make mine with fire." Elias's smile faltered, just slightly. "What did you say?" Cole holstered his gun. His eyes met Elias's, steady and unflinching. "You said we're bound. Then if I can't kill you with bullets, I'll burn with you instead." A flicker of unease crossed Elias's face. Cole turned, his hand reaching for the row of barrels stacked against the saloon wall, barrels filled with lamp oil, stacked high for weeks. With a spark, they'd turn the town into a furnace. The whispers screamed in his head, desperate now, clawing at his mind. Don't. But Cole's voice was steady. "Better the devil burns with me than this town lives in chains." He struck a match. The flame flared bright in the dying light. Elias's eyes widened, his grin gone. Cole dropped the match. The barrels erupted. Fire roared across the street, flames swallowing the air, the ground trembling beneath the explosion. The townsfolk screamed, scattering. Heat blasted through Red Hollow, smoke twisting into the sky. Through the inferno, Cole stood tall, his silhouette burning in the blaze. Elias staggered, his eyes glowing brighter, his laugh breaking into fury. Two brothers, one bound by blood, the other by fire, and a town watching their legend take root in flame. Chapter 5. The Curse Revealed. Flames devoured Red Hollow like a starving beast. The night sky turned crimson, ash raining down as buildings cracked and splintered under the heat. The saloon's windows blew out, sending shards across the street. Horses screamed in terror, breaking free and vanishing into the desert. Marshal Cole Avery stood in the center of the inferno, coat whipping in the wind, fire dancing around him. His revolver hung heavy at his side, useless now. Across the burning street, Elias Crow rose from the blast, wreathed in smoke, his grin sharpened by the firelight. "Clever, brother," Elias said, voice cutting through the roar of the blaze. His shadow warped against the flames, stretching longer, twisting with horns that curled into the night sky. "But fire won't save you. It only feeds me." Cole spat into the dirt, sweat and soot streaking his face. "Then I'll burn myself to starve you." Elias chuckled, stepping closer. Each footfall sent sparks leaping from the ground. His coat caught fire, but the flames didn't consume him, but they clung, crawling up his arms like serpents made of light. His eyes glowed brighter. Red coals set deep in his skull. "You think this curse is about survival?" Elias asked. "No, Cole. It's about dominion. The devil didn't just tie us together. He made me your keeper. Every scar you earn, I feel. Every wound I take, you bear. Our lives are one rope. Brother pull on one end and the other bleeds." Cole's chest tightened. He remembered the whispers in his nightmares, the shadows that curled at the edge of his vision. He had thought they were his burden alone, punishment for running from the altar that night. Now he understood they were Elias's gift, spilling over, staining him too. "You're lying," Cole growled, though doubt cracked his voice. Elias's grin widened. "Am I? Then tell me, Cole, why did you wake with burns on your arms the night I lit my first fire in Tombstone? Why do your bones ache when my knife tastes blood? You've felt it. You've known it." Cole staggered, memories slamming into him, nights waking in cold sweat. The sting of unseen wounds, the echo of screams that weren't his. His revolver shook in his grip. He wanted to fire, to silence that voice, but he knew the truth now. Bullets meant nothing. Elias spread his arms, flames climbing higher, wreathing him like a king of ash. "We're gods in this desert, Cole. I tried to show you. I wanted you to ride with me, to rule these broken towns together. But you clung to that badge, that star." Cole's gaze dropped to the scorched tin star on his chest, half melted from the fire. His throat tightened. That badge had been his anchor, his symbol of order in a world gone mad. But now it mocked him, a fragile scrap of tin against the weight of damnation. "You think this curse makes you strong," Cole said, his voice steadying. "But all it's made you is a slave. You can't stop killing, can't stop burning. That ain't freedom, that's chains." For the first time, Elias's grin faltered. His eyes narrowed, his shadow writhing against the flames. "Chains? No. This is power. You're just too weak to wield it. The whispers in Cole's mind screamed louder, urging him to surrender. Join him. Accept it. Bow, and the pain will end. Cole closed his eyes, fighting back the voices. His mother's words echoed in his memory, faint but steady. A man ain't measured by the power he takes, Cole. He's measured by what he's willing to give up for others. His eyes snapped open, steel in his gaze. You sold your soul for yourself, Elias, he said, but I'll give mine for this town. He holstered his Colt, turned, and walked straight into the fire. The crowd gasped, but Cole didn't falter. Flames licked his coat, smoke seared his lungs, but he pressed on until he reached the barrels by the general store. More oil, more fuel. He struck another match, his face grim in the glow. Elias's eyes widened. Don't you dare! Cole's voice was calm, steady, like a prayer. If we're bound, then I'll drag us both to hell. He dropped the match. Another explosion thundered through Red Hollow. Fire erupted in waves, swallowing buildings whole, turning the night into day. The ground shook, the air itself screaming. Cole was thrown to his knees, flames tearing at his clothes, heat blistering his skin. Pain surged through him, but something else surged too, Elias's scream. Across the inferno, the outlaw writhed, clutching his chest, smoke pouring from his mouth. His body cracked like charred wood, embers spilling from the fractures in his skin. You fool! Elias roared, voice breaking into a dozen echoes. If I fall, you fall too! Cole forced himself to stand, staggering through the fire. His body burned, but his will held. Then I'll fall as a man, not a devil. Elias lunged through the flames, eyes wild, hands clawed like a beast. The two brothers collided in the center of the blaze, fire swirling around them like a living storm. The townsfolk could only watch in horror and awe as the Avery brothers vanished into the inferno, one laughing, one silent, their struggle etched in flame against the desert night. And above it all, the whispers screamed, louder than ever, as if the devil himself leaned close to watch the outcome. Chapter 6. Ashes of Red Hollow. Morning came slow to Red Hollow. The desert sun rose pale and weary, casting its light over a town that no longer stood. Smoke curled from blackened timbers, ashes drifting like snow through the silence. What had once been saloons, shops, and homes was now a graveyard of charred wood and twisted iron. The air still carried the sting of burnt oil, the acrid taste of ruin. Survivors emerged from the outskirts, faces streaked with soot, eyes wide with disbelief. Mrs. Harper clutched her rosary, whispering prayers into trembling hands. Old Man Griggs sat on a broken wagon wheel, staring into the wreckage of his store. Tommy Hicks wandered barefoot through the ashes, searching for the sheriff's office that was no longer there. And through it all, no sign of Marshal Cole Avery or Elias Crow. The townsfolk gathered at the square, or what was left of it. The well still stood, though scorched black, the stone cracked from the heat. Men and women whispered, their voices low as if afraid the fire itself might still be listening. Did you see him? One man asked. They went into the flames, another answered. Marshall and Crow both, like ghosts. Mrs. Harper shook her head, tears streaking her ash-stained face. No man walks through fire like that and comes out whole. But Tommy, clutching a charred piece of wood like a weapon, spoke with stubborn defiance. Marshal Cole ain't dead. He can't be. He was fightin' the devil hisself. The people turned toward the ruins of the street, searching for proof, for a body, for anything. All they found was silence, broken only by the crackle of smoldering embers. By midday, the town began the slow work of sifting through the rubble. They pulled what little remained from the wreckage, half-burned blankets, bent nails, shards of glass that caught the sun like tiny mirrors. The children carried buckets of water from the well, though their hands blistered from the heat. Everywhere they searched, they expected to find Cole, or Elias, or both, but the brothers were gone. Toward evening, as the smoke thinned, Old Man Griggs stumbled upon something near the ruins of the saloon. Half buried in ash lay a piece of metal, blackened but still whole, a sheriff's star. He lifted it with shaking hands, the crowd pressing closer. The badge was scorched, edges bent, but the engraving still shone faintly beneath the soot. Mrs. Harper gasped, "Marshal Cole." They stood in silence, staring at the star. Some wept, others bowed their heads. Tommy reached for it, but Old Man Griggs held it tight, his voice rough with ash and grief. "This here don't just belong to one man anymore," he said. "It belongs to Red Hollow, to what he gave up for us." And so they nailed the star to the well, the last standing monument in town. It gleamed there in the setting sun, a small beacon against the ruin. That night, around the fires they built from broken wood, stories began. Some swore they saw Marshal Cole walking into the flames with his head high, dragging Elias down with him. Others claimed Elias's shadow had risen from the fire, horns and wings stretching wide before the blaze swallowed him whole. Tommy swore he heard gunshots in the smoke, though no one else had. Mrs. Harper told the children Cole had bargained his life to God, trading his soul to spare the town from the devil's grip. The tales twisted and grew with every telling. By midnight, Red Hollow was already haunted not by ghosts, but by a legend. And out in the desert, far from the ruined town, a lone traveler passing by swore he saw two figures walking along the ridge, one tall and steady, one limping, their shadows stretching long across the sand. The traveler never stopped to ask who they were. He only rode faster. Back in the hollow, the people chose to believe the marshal had given his life for theirs. It was easier than believing the devil had won. They slept uneasy, whispering prayers into the night, listening for echoes of gunfire carried on the wind. The star on the well gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a promise and a warning all at once. And though no one dared speak it aloud, every soul in Red Hollow knew the truth deep down. The fire had not ended the curse. It had only buried it deeper. Chapter 7. The Devil's Due. The desert night was quiet. Too quiet. Stars glimmered coldly above Red Hollow's ruins, as if the heavens themselves were watching. The town slept uneasy, clinging to the fragile hope that Marshal Cole Avery had fallen a hero, dragging his cursed brother Elias Crow into the flames with him. But legends never rest quietly. Out beyond the hollow, past the scorched ridges and dry riverbeds, a campfire flickered in the open desert. Two figures sat beside it, their silhouettes carved against the flames. One was Elias, his grin cracked but unbroken, eyes glowing faintly red. The firelight revealed the cracks in his skin where embers pulsed, still alive, still burning. His body bore the ruin of the inferno, yet he endured, his laughter low and bitter. Across from him sat Cole. His face was ash-streaked, his coat burned through, one arm bandaged in strips of cloth torn from his shirt. He was alive, but hollow. His eyes, once steady and sharp, now carried the weight of something unseen. They sat in silence, the fire snapping between them. The bond tethering them was invisible but undeniable. Cole could feel it in every breath, every heartbeat, that echoed not just in his chest, but in his brother's too. At last, Elias spoke. "You see now, don't ya? You can't kill me. You can't kill yourself without dragging me with you. And you don't have the stomach to finish it." Cole said nothing. He stared into the fire, jaw tight, hands clenched around his knees. Elias leaned forward, smirking. "That town thinks you're a hero, gave your life to save 'em. But you and I both know the truth. You're still breathing, same as me. And as long as we are, the devil still owns his due." The words cut deep. Cole remembered the townsfolk's faces, the children clutching their mothers, the badge nailed to the well. He had wanted his death to mean something, to end it all. But here he was alive, bound, cursed. "You keep laughing like this is victory," Cole finally said, voice low and rough. "But it ain't. You're chained, same as me." Elias's grin faltered for a moment, but he covered it with a scoff. "Better to rule in chains than to die free." Cole shook his head slowly. "That's where you're wrong." He reached into his coat and pulled something out, the scorched remains of his badge. Blackened, bent, barely more than a shard of metal, but still carrying a faint glimmer in the firelight. Elias sneered. "That tin star again? Thought you threw it away." Cole's eyes stayed on the badge. A man ain't measured by the power he holds. He's measured by what he's willing to give up for others. That's what Ma always said. Elias's expression flickered, the memory touching him in a place even the devil's curse could not reach. Cole closed his fist around the badge, the edges biting into his palm. "You bound us together with a curse, but maybe I can bind us with something stronger." Elias leaned forward, suspicion in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Cole's voice steadied, carrying the weight of choice. Sacrifice. Before Elias could move, Cole drove the badge deep into his own chest. The scorched metal pierced flesh, blood spilling across his shirt. Pain exploded through him, but he didn't falter. His breath came ragged, but his eyes stayed locked on his brother's. Elias screamed, not in rage, but in shock. He clutched his own chest, blood blooming beneath his coat where no wound had been before. The tether between them pulled tight, snapping like a stretched rope about to break. The fire roared higher, whipping into a vortex. The desert wind howled, carrying voices, whispers of rage, despair, and hunger. The devil himself was watching, his bargain unraveling. Elias staggered, his grin gone, eyes wide with fear for the first time. "Cole, don't, if you die." Cole's face softened, a tear cutting through the soot on his cheek. "That's the point, brother." With one final push, he drove the badge deeper, his body collapsing to the sand. His chest heaved, once, twice, then fell still. Elias fell too. His scream tore into the night, echoing across the desert, before his body cracked apart like burning timber. Embers poured from his skin, his shadow writhing in agony before shattering into smoke. The red glow in his eyes snuffed out, leaving only darkness. The campfire died with him, leaving the desert in silence. When morning came, the townsfolk found no trace of either man, only a scorched badge, half buried in the sand miles from Red Hollow, gleaming faintly in the Sunday. They took it back, nailed it beside the well, and told the children that Marshal Cole had given his life to save them all, that he had faced the devil himself and chosen sacrifice over power. The legend grew. Travelers spoke of two shadows seen at sundown, one walking steady, the other fading, their footsteps echoing through the desert wind. Parents told their children to live as Cole had lived, measured not by strength, but by the sacrifices they were willing to make. And though no one ever saw Elias again, the desert nights carried a warning. Some bargains come cheap, but the price is always more than a man can pay.